Hi, everybody. I'm Molly. I'm the Director of Operations with the ISA. Thanks for joining us today to talk with these two producers, Carlina Groppa and Arsalan Asli, about what they're looking for in a script and lots of other fun and goodies that we're going to learn. You may know that we originally started doing events live in person, Third Thursdays events, and then in March we brought them online, and now we're doing many more of them. Carolina was actually going to be our guest in March at the live Third Thursday. Yeah. So it's really good to get you back in the fold so we can learn and hear from you. We have a lot of great events coming up. Next Thursday is our Third Thursdays, virtual Third Thursdays, and this is going to be a really fun one. It's actually several of us from the ISA team, actually Max, Shayna, and I, along with Craig, Felicity, Jaren, and Felicity. Got everybody. I might have said somebody twice. That's okay. She's important. We're talking about how to break into the industry, tips and tricks, tools you need, how to brand yourself. This is going to be a really great discussion. So tune in for that, and please register on our events page. And then Max has his monthly webinar on the 26th, tips and rules for page writing. And those are always great discussions that you can find on our classes page. And then September 2nd, we're doing another class with Jess Hines. If you didn't see the first one, you can look at the Pro Tips and Tricks page to view that. She's amazing. She's going to be doing a class on rewriting this time titled Turning Shit into Fertilizer. So if that doesn't give you an idea of her personality, I don't know what does. One other thing I want to mention real quick is we just extended our Fast Track Fellowship deadline to the 20th. That's next Thursday. So if you haven't submitted, now is the time. We have 8 amazing mentors that the fellows get to meet with, showrunners, co-EPs, president of production, director of development, literary managers. There's a lot of great people. So check that out on our site. I think that's it. Pro Tips and Tricks page is the other thing. Please check that out. This will be posted on there after, probably next week when Scott has some time to edit and post it. And there's just a wealth of videos and information. So many videos. I'm
the Director of Education with the ISA. I've been with the ISA for about 6 years. I also am the VP of Development for our development company called Creative Screenwriter Productions. I have my own consulting company called The Story Farm, where I work one-on-one with writers on a weekly basis. You can find more about that at thestoryfarm.org. But I created a course, and for the whole summer, the ISA has been giving 50% off the coursework. It was originally only $99 anyway. It's $49 now. And it's a 12-week course that once you purchase it, you have it for life. A lot of audio, a lot of video, a whole bunch of instructions in terms of how to work through the development of a project from first draft to final draft, technically in 12 weeks. All right, so Carolina, Arsalan, thank you so much for joining us. This is going to be a fun conversation. I sent some very real questions to you before we started, obviously, just to kind of get you prepped. One of the primary points of doing what we do here with and for the ISA, where these webinars are concerned, is to be inspiring, informative, educational. Obviously, my role being the Director of Education, we can't stress enough how important it is for writers and filmmakers and just creative people in general to be practicing their craft. And that is technically education. And even though you can be writing for hours on end, if you're not figuring out ways to improve, then you're just eventually going to be spinning your wheels and you're not going to be getting over the hump that we all know we have to get over. So that's why we do these webinars. But coming back to the questions that I sent both of you, some of them are somewhat hard truth type of questions that I want to talk about, obviously, in a motivational, inspiring way. But because of your roles in the industry, and I'm going to read a little bit in terms of their bios just so you get a little bit of a background, you confront hard truths all the time. Every day, as producers, you have to deal with the fact that this is a business and an art form. And so that crossroads can be very difficult, not only for the creative people, but just the people on set who are dealing with the basics of crew and operations. But the producers are really your jobs, and maybe I'm putting words in your mouth, but is to marry the business with the art. And so that can be very difficult. So Arsalan, born in Iran and raised in Canada and the United States, Arsalan started his career in the investment banking and real estate development sectors in an operational capacity through his family's business in the Middle East. With cinema, art, and theatrics as his spiritual compass and lifelong passion, Arsalan transitioned into the entertainment industry right after high school. Initially writing, directing, and producing, Arsalan's short films have premiered at dozens of festivals across the country. In 2016, he and his creative partners founded 5-4, a multifaceted entertainment company engaged in the development, packaging, and production of content across all genres of independent film, television, and new media. So welcome, Arsalan. I want to know a lot more about 5-4 and what you do and on a daily basis. We'll get into that. And then we'll introduce Carolina. So Carolina produced the award-winning in 2017 Emmy-nominated documentary AUTISM in Love. It premiered at rave reviews at the 2015 Tribeca Film Festival and aired on PBS's Independent Lens series. In 2016, in February of 2016, Autism in Love was the recipient of the 5th Annual Peak Award for Disability in Film by the Utah Film Center. Congratulations. And she served as a co-producer on Miss Virginia, starring Uzo Aduba, and provided production supervising support on the Netflix original films Girlfriend's Day and Happy Anniversary. She had the pleasure also of co-producing The Female Brain, Whitney Cummings' directing debut feature film, and a whole bunch of other things. These are shortened versions of bios, but welcome, Carolina, and thank you for doing this. Like Molly said, we've been trying to get you in front of the camera or on stage for a while now, but you're here finally with us. So why don't we do a little bit of an introduction for both of you to talk about how you both are working together right now. You're working on a movie. Correct?
Yeah, so when we've been trying to make this happen since March, and when this sort of transitioned into more of a panel in this virtual square with a bunch of people watching that I cannot see, which is weird, but cool. I immediately thought of Arsalan because we are in the middle of producing a film together. And so I thought it would be an interesting perspective to hear from two producers who are working together for the first time, but it has been about 6 months now. And he said, yes, lucky for us.
Yeah.
Yes.
So where are you in the process of this project you're working on?
We're in active development. We have dates in place for Q3 of next year, that we're idealistically working towards. But of course, as you guys know, there's a lot in the air with not just COVID, but just generally the development of projects and making all the schedules align. It's one thing to bring elements and attach elements to a project, whether it's creative or financial or some sort of sales, for distribution. It's another to just make the scheduling work, and not just the scheduling. Now we have the intangibility of a pandemic. So, we're idealistically working towards those dates, and, we have an amazing cast that we can't wait to share with everyone. And, the core, the heartbeat, the walking heart of the project is, of course, Carlina Acosta, our writer, director, and cinematographer. She's amazing. It's been one of the most wonderful creative collaborations of my life, and we've been incredibly fortunate to have Carlina join us as well.
Yes, there's two of us. In case
there's two of them.
We're both Brazilian as well.
Exactly, small world, and. So it's really been, we'll get into this in our conversation as well, where, the true happiness in this business is, the root of that is in who you work with and who you collaborate with, because that's the everyday, and that's really where you're going to find your happiness. And, knock on wood, the team that we're building has been amazing, and we're getting a little closer every day, and, are excited to share the project with the world. It's really a beautiful spiritual project. Oh,
cool. So I was going to ask, what's the genre? I mean, not that you need to give the whole pitch, but who's the audience for this?
It's on an abstract level. It's ethereal. It's spiritual. It's very much like Tarkovsky and Kieslowski. A lot of like what Apichatpong Weerasethakul does in Thailand. I'm just making Trump jokes, so the Thailand kicked in. Sorry, with my in Thailand, and a lot of Lucrecia Martel's work. Very, very spiritual in that sense, but the core of the story is a identity piece, you know, reconciling death, rebirth. It's got elements of sci-fi. You know, I'm just trying to be as vague as possible without giving away too much, because that's the whole intention of the project, is to go in, you know, not knowing too much.
Yeah, I'd say it follows the skeleton of a drama with some of these elements in it, and really plays nicely with all of the elements that Arsalan has so beautifully described.
Okay.
It's a feature film, in case we didn't make that clear.
Yes. I should have mentioned that at the top.
Yeah, I assume so. So Carolina, I mean, I didn't put this in the questions, and this tends to happen, obviously. We just kind of riff off of some of the answers. But we'll talk a little bit about the development process, because I think a lot of writers don't necessarily know everything that goes into the actual development process, because it isn't just script development. There are so many, development's too vague of a word, really, for what you have been doing for the past 6 months, which I think some writers hearing that, their eyes might pop a little bit, because 6 months to do what exactly? And really, a lot of times projects spend that much more time than 6 months in development. So just talk about the development process. What are some things that writers may not know? Some of everybody watching may know some of this, but I think it'd be good to just kind of get that review a little bit. What have you been doing?
Yeah, I think it depends, because these questions are so hard to answer, because every project is so different. Every team is different, right? So it's like I think everybody's always like searching for that one secret answer that exists, and the answer is there's no secret. It's like literally every dynamic is so unique and different. So sometimes development can look like you have a seed of an idea, and a producer is developing that with you, and that can take years. Or you have a script that's in a really good place as like maybe for the writer, it's like a 10th draft, but for the producer, it's like, all right, there's still a lot more to flesh out, but there's enough here that we can start getting momentum as far as getting certain elements attached, or getting people reading the script, or kind of brainstorming and figuring out where you are in the life of the project and what makes sense as far as next steps are concerned. And I think that varies greatly depending, like I said, on all of these elements. But with this particular project, the way that this came into my life is I had worked with Carolina. I produced a short that she had DP'd with Gillian Jacobs for Refinery 29 a few years back. And she had this feature that she had written and was stepping up to direct, and had already had Arsalan on her side as her producer. And they wanted to bring me on because I bring in the physical producing, line producing knowledge to the table. And so since I got on board the team, Arsalan had sort of been driving a lot of the creative conversations and strategizing, and who could be potential good producing partners as far as financiers or production companies. But we needed to take a step back and go, well, how much is this going to cost? And what is a version of how we make this as scripted? And it's constantly a conversation and an evolution. But I think once you have a sense of where you want this story to go, that's usually what I love doing is just helping, especially first-time filmmakers. Like with Carolina, for example, yes, she's been DPing for a decade, so she knows production. She's been on set, but she's not going to come at it from the perspective of now a director and all of the things that she has to think about. So I can help by making a budget and a schedule that may be theoretical in form. Like, hey, actually, this is why this scene that is 1/8 of a page is actually a whole day to shoot. Like, do we want to do that, And this is the cost of that. And is there a different way to achieve this story beat without taking a whole day of shooting? And sometimes it's a lot of educational, to your point about education. So it's conversations. It's kind of like, you have the sort of marble stone, and every day you're coming in a little bit more and more and etching out what the statue is going to look like collectively as a team. And so for this particular project, it's been a lot of that. It's been a lot of creative conversations. And one of the things I preach a lot is we are aiming to do this next year, but because of COVID, we have the gift of time. So let us use this time to learn, to research, to have conversations that typically would only happen in prep. Like, I want to have them now, because why not? Let's talk to the editor now and talk about, here's our plan. Does that work for post? And really getting all of the teammates involved much earlier than you would in a traditional production. Because I think when you're talking about independent filmmaking, to Arsalan's point, so much of the journey is about who you're going to bring on that bus with you to get, because it's such an uphill battle. And so I think having creatives and department heads that maybe more, wouldn't necessarily be involved in this stage with the writer, or in this case, a writer who's also going to be directing and DPing it. So it's a lot of hats. It's great to have all of these perspectives early on to inform the plan, inform the script, and also give them a sense of, true collaboration in the script phase from early on, as opposed to traditionally, we're prepped, we're greenlit, let's now take interviews, do interviews with department heads and see who wants to come on board. So it creates some more, just more familial territory to navigate. And I think for this particular project, it was definitely what was required and what I pitched to the team, and they went for it. So very long answer to your question, but hopefully I got it in.
No, you didn't even touch on the fact that you've actually gone through the casting process also.
Yeah, so we've been exactly. I think this is unique because we're dealing with a filmmaker that may not be a director quite yet, but there's a decade long of relationships and people that she's in a way like vetted. So when we're saying, hey, she's stepping up to the plate to do this thing, it is met with a little more like, oh, okay, like this is all forward momentum. And so it's been helpful to get us. She also has a lot of contacts with casts herself and people that she wanted. So it's been really, and she's a producer on this as well. So it's been a really awesome collaboration. And I think having a creative, she is our leader in that sense, and having someone who is so open and malleable to our perspectives and our points of views and our suggestions across everything. And there isn't this ego of like, well, no, I want this, or I think it should be that. Is I think the secret sauce, of like that dance of putting anything together.
I think, to just complement what Carlina is saying, there's, this is a little bit more of a macro thought as well, where, you want to be very selective with the filmmakers you work with, but also you want to be passionate about what they are doing, because you recognize authorship. Authorship, I'm talking about singularity, I'm talking about idiosyncrasy, I'm talking about a voice, without sounding kind of too cliched. Genuinely, someone that can, whether articulated on the page, on a letter, or in a oral pitch, where they have such a fundamental understanding of what they want to tell, the conversation they want to have, and how they want to execute it, and the idea that, it's a first-time director, etc., is again a part of a construct. It's not some sort of biblical law. It's made up. And what filmmakers and what producers do, what we do as a team, is we instill confidence into the cast and financiers that let's take this journey together, because this conversation, the story, these characters, it's worth it, and that's really been a key element in pushing this project forward. And again, why I mentioned macro at the top of this thought is, for all the writers and filmmakers that are in this conversation or listening at a later date, be patient and really find those relationships and those filmmakers and those stories that you want to tell, because it's going to add to the stamina of getting a movie made, getting a TV show made. That's really important. Authorship.
So important, because I heard, and I wish I could remember who said this. I might have heard multiple people say it, but the idea that, and it's really not even an idea, it's the truth, that a screenplay is an invitation to collaborate. And just everybody watching, we only have two of a very large group of people who are trying to make this script come to life. And so I think writers having that understanding of, yes, my script is important because it's not only creating jobs, people are going to come together and actually make this thing. And then, of course, we have two leaders who are going to try to lead the charge to make it happen. But there's also what you're talking about, Arsalan, which is a great segue into one of my questions, was understanding meaning you, the writer, your role in all of that process. Because like you were saying, Carolina, it is extremely relative to the project. Independent film, a screenwriter is going to be much more involved in a lot of senses, possibly the director also, like you both have. But understanding where you are as the writer and how to come into play is basically what you're saying, Arsalan, is that you're looking for someone with a voice that you want to work with because you're going to be spending so much time with that person. So when we get into, and I'll start with Carolina with this question, this idea of voice, I ask it a lot on my podcasts. I talk about it as much as I can, not only in the coursework, but on these webinars. What does it mean? And I almost always get some form of a different answer, which I love because it's so relative. And then Arsalan, maybe we'll give the second question to you, is what can a writer do to help hone in and find that voice if they don't know exactly what that is? And obviously, Carolina, you can answer that too.
I mean, I think if your voice is a combination of, your perspective on the world and your curiosity for it and the lens that you bring to anything. I think, there's this famous Ira Glass quote about the gap. When you get into any creative field, especially writing, like there's your taste that gets you into the thing. There's like the kinds of movies you see or the TV shows, and you're like, that's what I want to get to. But it takes a long time to get your taste and your skill to match. And a lot of people give up before the gap between those two things narrow enough where they overlap, and now you click and here you are. And I think, we hear all the stories in the industry of the years and years it took for someone to find their voice, and, Jordan Peele, right? Get Out. Like it didn't just happen in a 1 year, like cramming to deadline. It was a massaged, slow burn, patient thing. So having that patience, I guess, to find your voice is super important, but also be living your life. Go and live your life so that you can infuse your stories with life and people that are beyond just imagination. I think that is also really important, but it's a crossover of all of that. And the way and the order of how that happens for each person, I think, is very unique and specific. I think maybe some people come into it with the craft. They know how to, break down a story and really get a really solid, beautifully written script, but maybe like the heart is missing, or someone really has the heart, but they don't know structure. There's all of these things. And so I think every writer is on their singular journey, like we all are. So I think the most important thing you can do is just constantly be hungry, be learning, be consuming like art, not just television shows. Outside of that, consume life and let life inform what it is that you have to say, because it's like, yes, there are many movies that are fluff movies, I guess you could say, but my question is the why. Like, why are you writing? What is it that you want to say? It's a miracle anything gets made in our business. So if you get the opportunity to get lightning in a bottle and get your story told, what is the conversation you want this story to spark? Or maybe there is no conversation. You just want to write something that's going to make people laugh and feel good and show their friends the clip of this ridiculous scene that made them laugh so much, that they pee their pants. Like, whatever your why is, like, honor that. I think there's strength in that. And I think sometimes there's this feeling of like, well, what do I want to write? What does the market want? What do producers want? Like, I'll write anything. I can write everything in all genres. And it's like, okay, cool. But like, maybe start with one thing and do that thing really well. And then from there, like, spread out, branch out from there. So that would be my advice. And I know it's frustrating because it's easier said than done, and it takes time, and I'm impatient and I want things to happen yesterday, but I've also been in this business for 14 years, so yeah, it's real. Patience really does pay off. So
it's a very real process of self-awareness and a spiritual approach to asking questions. And I don't necessarily mean on a religious level, but I mean, deep down, who am I kind of question that we have to be asking ourselves. If you intend to be a screenwriter, then you are going to be called an artist, even though it doesn't necessarily have the same connotation of a painting on the wall. You are creating a piece of artwork, even if you're writing, National Treasure, like whatever. It's artwork in some way. And so you have to be infusing your voice in there. So Arsalan, what kind of advice can you give writers who maybe somebody comes up to you and says, I know I love doing this, but I just don't know what my voice is?
I think the most practical advice is to watch and read as much as possible. Stephen King has really simple, practical advice about, to become a great writer, you must be a great reader. You just got to absorb. This is what you're truly passionate about. And of course, you need In this business, it's a business of such that you need some sort of, side hustle or side hustles to like keep a livelihood going. But if you have a, deep, like arterial passion for the business, then you're going to make it work in LA or in New York. And then on all the times that you're not doing your side hustle to handle your livelihood, you're absorbing.
Mm-hmm.
You're watching as much and you're reading as much as possible. This day and age, it's all accessible. I don't want to hear any piracy bullshit. It's all effing accessible for effing good prices, manageable prices. I mean that sincerely. I'm not saying go spend $30 next month and watch Mulan, but I'm saying subscribe to the Criterion channel, subscribe to Mubi, read scripts. That's how you hone your voice, knowing what type of stories you tell. The nucleus of that is what you grew up watching, what you kind of cut your teeth on material wise. I would have to presume if anyone is passionate about screenwriting and stepping into this crazy business, they grew up on cinema, or they grew up in reading, or they grew up in absorbing creative material in some form, or expressive art in some form, right? So yes, practical advice: watch, read, absorb, be unyielding, indefatigable.
I love that.
That's how you hone your voice.
Totally. I love that, because what we sometimes don't realize we're doing when we're reading and consuming material, whether it's a novel or newspaper article or something, we're unconsciously connecting with who we are deep down, because we are then reacting to what we're reading. And that is usually coming from a place that we don't even know where it is. I remember interviewing a writer from Bob's Burgers, and I'll keep it relatively short because obviously you two are our centerpieces here. But I remember thinking this was so profound, because one of the writers grew up with a twin, and they had quite literally the same exact experiences growing up. And they had parents who argued constantly. It wasn't abusive necessarily. It was a dramatic household. And the writer, Bob's Burgers, said, I took it just kind of comedically. I rolled my eyes at my parents. I just thought it was a little goofy. And I kind of poked fun at it. My brother, who had the same exact experiences, took it very difficultly. Like he couldn't consume it the same way I could. And they had the same experiences, they were same age, they had the same everything, and they just had different perspectives. And so I think what reading does, Arsalan, is it brings you as the consumer into what's the meaning behind this to me, not necessarily to everyone. It's not a universal truth.
And I would also add the other element to this is right. Like that's another part, like the luxury of writing is that you don't need to gather a village to shoot, the luxury of writing is you can literally do it pen on paper, or investing in fade in, or just on a computer, whatever it is. Right. Again, there's a nature of having to be unmerciful with the craft. And again, I say all this with the prerequisite of like, you've made the decision of wanting to be in the business, of wanting to be a screenwriter, of wanting to be, a filmmaker, whatever the avenue is that you picked.
Yeah. All right. So new question, and you touched on it, Carolina, a little bit, and it's a weird, probably too vague of a question, because it is extremely relative, but I think it's important to talk about it because there's this idea in most screenwriters' heads, more like a question, of what are producers looking for? So we can try to answer that question the best we can, obviously. So I want to know what you personally are looking for from a creative standpoint, but then also we can talk about the industry in general, because we'll get into the conversation about production during COVID and how we approach that. And what's going to happen, 8 months from now. But we'll have it twofold a little bit. What do you look for in material? And then what do you think, in general, the industry is looking for now?
I personally gravitate towards stories that, when I think to some of my favorite movies and movies that I'm like, wow, I wish I could make that now. I find that a lot of these themes that I have enjoyed as a kid growing up, or whatever characters I've identified with in stories, seem to be similar themes as to what I gravitate to as a producer, as a storyteller. And it's, you know, it's Short Term 12, it's Little Miss Sunshine, it's Amelie, it's stories of the underdog, it's character driven, very strong, you know, sort of clear artistic approaches to these. All three movies couldn't be more different from each other. And Short Term 12 was done for like, you know, a penny back when you could still do that. But if you look at Short Term 12, it's, in my opinion, like a perfect script and a perfect movie, in the sense that every beat makes sense. Every character is developed. Every actor who played that character was completely alive in those roles. And it's no coincidence a lot of the actors from that movie have gone on to become who they've become, you know? So every element of how that project was written and how it was made, in my opinion, is that magic lightning in a bottle that I aim to create with all the projects that I'm producing in whatever genre, you know? So there's those kinds of stories, but more importantly, I'm at a place in my career where I am more interested in the people and the journey than the thing itself. Because we can have the best of intentions and something could still turn into shit or never be seen by anybody. And that's everybody's fear, right, on this call, I'm sure. But it's a reality of our business. And so if we cannot control the outcome, the only thing we can control is the journey, is the day-to-day showing up, rolling your sleeves and getting in the trenches. Well, so then who are you going to get in those trenches with? Like, I have walked away from incredible scripts because I just didn't connect with the writer. I was like, I just can't imagine dealing with this person every day for what could be 5 years of my life. It's my life. I get only one life. And I only have so much energy that's non-renewable before my time is up on this earth. So who do I want to go down that journey with? And so for me, that in this stage of my career is more important than anything. And if I have that and something that is obviously I'm really passionate about, then it's just go time. But even with all of those elements, it is still a continuous marathon of pushing a boulder uphill every single day. So it's like, if I'm in the trenches, I want to look around and be like, guys, this is fucking hard, right? Right. Okay, cool. Instead of people whining and being like, well, I don't want to push a boulder, like you do it, you know? And there's people like that for sure. And I think I'm a big energy believer, as you can tell from this conversation. And so I believe that if you want to attract people who are sort of in your same energetic level, you can. And that's the thing that I think writers need to be super careful about. I understand sometimes you're just selling a script or it's just a sale, it's transactional. But if you're talking about independent filmmaking and really being on this journey, like, just be very selective, even as the writer, with the person that is coming to you and wanting to be a part of your team, because it will make a difference, you know, and you will feel the pressures of that if you have a producer who may have a ton of credits and have a lot of promises, but you guys just don't connect in that way. The weight of that will eventually wear on you. So that, I would say, is what I'm looking for. The genre itself is not of interest. Like, I'm open to all genres. And that's why you hear producers say, oh, anything is interesting to me. It's like, well, yes, because what it is we want a person who's got a clear voice and the passion and the ability to articulate that passion and what's in their head to the rest of the team. And if you bring that passion to your pitches, and if you're the writer director and you have a clear way that you see how this is going to unfold, even if you don't have all the answers, people are going to get on board, because I now have to get on board and I have to sell that same passion to a financier. I have to sell that same passion to agents and managers to get talent. So if you're like murky, how am I supposed to be clear? It's your idea. It's in your head, you know? So I think that is a big one. As far as what the industry is looking for, I mean, I think anyone that tells you they know is lying. Like, nobody knows what they're looking for. Our industry is weird. It's emotional. It makes no sense. And no amount of data and statistics and financials of what worked a year ago has ever proved to be like, and this will work this year if we do the exact same thing, especially now that we're in the wild, wild west of everything, with not just the streamers, but with COVID, obviously. So that is an answer I wish I had, question I wish I had the answer to, but yeah. Yeah.
Arsalan, what do you think? I mean, yeah, I could repeat the question if you want, but
please do.
Yeah, it's just the idea of what are producers looking for. I know a lot of screenwriters ask that question.
As a screenwriter, it's potentially futile to approach a idea where you're generating it thinking it's what the town is looking for. You're fucked. Sorry. We can't swear on this. I apologize. You are, because what's going to happen is you're writing it with the intention of trying to capitalize off it before even trying to understand what the story is, right? So I would say do not approach any story or idea with the general route of this is what the town is looking for. The town doesn't know what they're looking for, right? It's kind of a myth that like everyone says, oh, we're looking for the next Thrones, we're looking for the next House of Cards. That was like one window right after, you know, that explosion. And they're like, we're looking for this and that. It's what you are most passionate about. You know, I know it's another topic we're going to get to is like, you know, who's right for what material, but it's what you're most passionate about. Because if you're going to take this project out or spend a year of your time, year and a half of your time writing about it, you have to absolutely deeply love it and understand it and be writing it because it's what you want to tell, not because it's what so-and-so is looking for. Can't do that. You're going to waste your time. So that's with respect to what the town is looking for. Okay? A great story is a great story. A great story is relatable. A great story has great themes. A great story doesn't answer questions. It raises. It spotlights. That's that. With respect to what I'm looking for, I mean, that's a little bit of a longer answer, but generally, you know, again, it goes back to authorship, you know. I love working with writer-directors, particularly. It's a lot of what I cut my teeth on growing up as a just consumer of cinema. But I don't want to take up too much time and really get into the weeds of what I'm looking for outside of passion, authorship. Why are you telling this story? How do you feel the engagement, the concourse, the dialogue within society, within culture is going to embrace the story, and how will you engage with it? You know, not to get esoteric or anything, but that's just sincerely what it is. You know, so it could be anything with the core of drama with the backdrop of sci-fi. It could be a stoner comedy with heart. You know, it could be pure drama. It could be, you know, again, it's all about authorship. I don't know if that really answers the question, but that's generally.
It's a great answer because you touched on something about, you know, quote unquote, wasting your time, and the town will always love a great idea. And this is one of those tricky subjects to discuss with an audience of screenwriters. Because and I'll just give a little bit of a background. I've already mentioned this to Carolina and Arsalan, but there was a Twitter thread going around mentioning, you know, what is the job of a consultant? Is it to just help a writer improve the current script they're writing, or can a consultant be that much more helpful by saying the concept just isn't good enough? And it's a hard question to ask because who are you, the consultant, to say that concept isn't good enough if the writer believes in the story idea? At the same time, I do kind of understand what is being brought up there. So the heart of the question is really kind of an impossible one to answer, but how do you know if an idea is a good idea? You don't really, unless you just don't. There's no formula. But at the same time, talking about what you mentioned, Arsalan, wasting your time, you do have to come to a place as a screenwriter to be able to determine, is this concept something that I should be writing personally because I need to spend this amount of time on it? And you know, I don't want to use too many specific examples, but Carolina, this idea of, am I the right person to write this project? Have you come across any of that type of situation where either a writer brought a script to you or you were working with a director considering something and you thought, you know, I don't think you're the right person to work on this? I mean, how do you have that conversation that this concept isn't working? I don't know how to talk to a writer about that.
Yeah. I mean, I think you have to have hard conversations. Being a collaborator means not just like massaging someone and being like, yes. And, you know, it's playing multiple roles. And if you cannot have those hard conversations with someone, then, you know, I would question what is it then that you're after? Do you want just someone who's going to enable you and pat you on the head? Like, if you really want to grow as an artist, it's going to come with these challenging questions, right? But I think you have to be very careful about who you're asking those questions to. And is that really the person who's going to give you the right advice? It's like Brene Brown talks about, she only wants feedback from the people who are in the arena also getting knocked down. The people that are just sitting around and watching have no say in what she's doing. So she wants the feedback, but she's very selective about who she's getting it from. So I think you have to be very careful when you're just taking an idea and mass putting it on Twitter. Does everybody think this is a good idea? It's an art form. It's subjective. It's a town full of opinions. So there'll be, 50 people that will say it's shit and then 50 people that'll say it's brilliant. You get to decide which of the 50% you want to believe in and then move forward, right? So if you know you have something very unique and very cool that maybe no one else sees, you should keep moving forward with that. But you should always have a trusted inner circle of people that you can be vulnerable with and have these conversations with, that are maybe writers, directors, producers, and say, hey, like, I've been working on this for 5 years. It's not really getting any traction. What do you think? And then it's such a personal thing. Every artist has to come to that on their own, that answer on their own. Like, when you've put enough energy into something and it's not getting the traction you thought it was going to get or that you wanted, or it's not unfolding the way you imagined, to say, I think I'm ready to move on. But I think that's a call you have to be empowered to make for yourself, regardless of what anybody else is going to say, because your idea can be crap today, but actually in 5 years, it could be exactly what the town is looking for. How could anybody have predicted that? You couldn't. So it was you and your taste and your authorship of believing in that idea, despite everybody else, that gets you to that finish line. However, I think if you are sending it to people to read that you trust, and it isn't catching on like you thought it would, I would just look at that. And can you be honest with yourself and go, oh, okay, well, maybe this isn't really fully fleshed out, or this isn't really being communicated the way I thought it was. And I think you have to really, it's really about, like, I really believe in just like that within you, as silly as it sounds, you have the answer, and you cannot look to the entire industry to validate that, because everybody's going to have a different opinion. It is all about opinions. Just a short plug, I have a podcast that I host and I produce, where I talk to other producers from all walks of life, people who are 20 years my senior, people who have way more impressive resumes than me. And I bring that up because this is literally something they say to me, and I consider myself small potatoes next to a lot of these women. And so it's not just me saying this. I'm regurgitating advice and wisdom that come from women and producers who are 10, 20 years my senior, who've been in this business and the ebbs and flows of this business way longer than I have. So I think it's smart if you can hear that and trust that, and maybe spend your time finding that inner circle of people you can trust, and really, really creating that for yourself as an artist, I think is very important.
I think it's a great point. You're testing ideas with people you trust. Won't BS you. They're going to tell you what they think. They're not just going to pat you on the back and say, yeah. This sounds great. So Arsalan, in terms of just that same topic, it's one thing for a writer to consider, I think this idea is great. I'm going to spend the next 2 or 3 months writing the script. Could they save time? And like, that's the hard part. Like, what if the concept just wasn't ready regardless? And now I just spent 3 months working on this, and now everybody's telling me you need to do so much more work. How do you test an idea before you've even written anything? Is there a process you have even when you listen to a pitch? How do you tell a writer that the idea is just not working?
Being sensitive and frank. I think it's committing to your sincere feedback and having the capacity to communicate that feedback, knowing that the writer is going to have to receive it, this baby that they bore. You have to, again, like, you have to be sensitive, but you have to be frank. You can't hold back in a sense, but you also have to just be, again, honest to the point, and even vulnerable in a sense, where you really want to say, like, to me, you don't want to approach it objectively and say, this is how it needs to be. You want to approach it subjectively and say, to me, this is how I responded to it. And that's really important. And it is a muscle that you have to continuously stretch. It's just like exercising. It's just like brushing your teeth and eating food. It's a conditioning. And the more you do it, the better your communication becomes, the more robust the conversations become, the more effective, and frankly, sometimes it can be, again, fruitful for the writer, because if they take the time to really hear the notes and the feedback and they digest it, some of it can really end up becoming really good for the project, so not all the time, but sometimes, it really depends. But it really is a conditioning. It's a bit of an art form, that conversation, because you don't want to blow smoke or waste their time,
I think that what's so great about that answer, Arsalan, is that I hope all the writers are hearing that it's important for you as a writer to receive feedback, obviously with an open mind. But if you do start hearing people saying, no one's going to accept this, or no one's going to, it's almost like the all of the above answer on a test or something. It's like, it's rarely, it's rarely that way. And that's a little unfair for that person giving you that note to say something like that, because it isn't true, because there may very well be somebody out there. The question also needs to be, how passionate about the project am I to go 10 years trying to make this thing come to life? You really have to ask yourself that question.
Can I just add, I don't subscribe to the wasted time idea. I think there's always something to learn. Maybe you spend 3 months, 3 years cracking something that isn't working, but what have you learned in those 3 years that are now going to make the next thing maybe that much faster or that much smoother? Or maybe this idea doesn't work today, but 10 years later, you write a script and you realize the seed of that idea from 10 years ago is actually this script. So all of it is part of your evolution as an artist and as a human being and your perspective. So anyone who tells you it's a waste of time, I just say run away from that person, because they don't get how the craft works of being a storyteller.
It sounds like if there was no pandemic, you could probably get this thing going by January, or sooner than what's scheduled. So what are the practical issues right now with shooting something in a literal sense? Yeah.
So for those listening, just so you know, if I didn't say this at the top, I actually come from a physical producing background. I came up in the industry as a UPM line producer, and have in the past year or so been making the leap to creative producing. But a lot of the insight I bring as a creative producer is from that place of production and execution, having been the person on set, knowing how things go, knowing how conversations go with writers when you're, on the weekend after week one being like, we have to cut pages. And it's like, we told you this 3 months ago, you didn't want to do it, but here we are, we have to cut pages. We told you this was going to happen. So to answer this question from that perspective, the challenge right now is insurance. So insurance companies are not covering anything related to COVID. So if you were to mount a production and get shut down because anybody gets COVID, there's no protection for that. So the liability for anybody who's a big production, like television shows especially, which it's such a long journey with television, a lot of the studios and networks are afraid and scared, understandably so. It's why you see some production starting to resume internationally, like Jurassic Park is filming, and they are going to be a great guinea pig for other big studio productions of how it is done. But they have a $100 million budget. They spent $9 million of that just in COVID costs. So when you talk about independent filmmaking, I mean, if we're talking about a $5 million movie and $500,000 of that is just COVID testing and PPE and all the personnel that you need, it's a big undertaking. And not only that, I'm not sure if anybody saw about a month or two ago, all the unions got together and they put out the white paper, which kind of dictates if and how all the unions are going to greenlight you to go into production. And of course, they're very strict, understandably so. And there is this mandate right now for 10-hour shoot days, which is very hard. especially on, indies notoriously work 14, 16-hour days because you have a limited window to make your movie. So the biggest hurdle, I think, right now is how do you go into production, which is already, there's so many things that change daily, and now you have to test your cast and your crew daily, sometimes multiple times a week. And you can't have anyone really be on your set unless they've been cleared for 24 hours. So how do you navigate all of that? The costs of that, and that there's this COVID, sort of COVID officer on set who could at any point shut your production down if you're not adhering to the COVID guidelines. Mm. Like, it's a lot of question marks. It's a lot of anxiety. And I would venture to say, why? I understand the need to go back to production. That is my main thing. So I get that. But at what point are you compromising on the creative and the, creating the best environment for production at the expense of all of this extra pressure because of COVID? And will you really walk away with the best story that you could have captured in that amount of time? So those are some of the big question marks. And, obviously people's comfort level, everybody is sort of on a spectrum, it seems, with whether or not they believe COVID is real and masks or no masks. Like, I think the state of our country when it comes to this belief, I think the industry is a microcosm for that. And I think it's why a lot of productions are starting to resume internationally. And it may be a while before we're sort of up and running, but it is a big consideration of how do you already structure something that is full of fires daily to figure out, and then add these COVID precautions, and then also try to do it in 10 hours. Right. So, I'm curious to see how we're going to limp our way through this time and find a new system that works. But I hope that we can be resuming production next year. And I do think that smaller, intimate stories that can be told will have a lot better chance of getting greenlit and financed, especially with the independent film realm versus, anything that would require multiple locations, a lot of background, a lot of actors, intimacy, all of that.
So there is such a thing as a COVID-friendly project.
Yeah, I think there is, but it's at what cost? Not just financially, but to the detriment of the creative process. Sets are collaborative, crazy, chaotic spaces. If you are in a pod where you can't get to the director to ask about a prop because you know what I mean? All of those nuances that just happen organically on set. I know there's a way forward. Of course, safety is of paramount importance, but I'm wondering at what expense that will cost to the production as a whole.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a big deal.
It's a huge deal. It's a big one. And I think for independent features or anything that shoots in a smaller amount of time, it's much easier to imagine that world. But for television and episodic, where it's months and months on end, the risk is that much higher unless you have the budget to be in a little space together, which is what Jurassic World did. They rented out an entire hotel where everybody, including the staff of the hotel, lives and breathes in this hotel, and they all hang out together.
They're in New Zealand too, right? So
they are in, I think, London right now, and then we'll go to Malta if I'm not mistaken. But reading about it, it's if I'm Jurassic World, I have $100 million, I sure can rent out an entire hotel for 3 months and make that feel very insular so everybody's safe. But if you're an indie, that's not necessarily a viable option. So how do you navigate that?
What about the non-union, really small budget filmmakers who are let's just be safe and go make a movie?
I think the issue with that is, the permit offices may not give you a permit. You maybe have to do all non-union, you're not going to get SAG actors. And then are you really being careful? I'm not saying don't do it. I'm just saying make sure everybody who's on board for that journey understands that they need to be quarantining, that what they all need to do to be safe together. And that's entirely possible, but you're going to have to be flying under the radar. I think, especially if you're trying to shoot in LA, which is a bigger market, I would imagine all the unions are kind of looking around to see who's trying to be tisk, and they're going to come and be like, hey, what are you doing? That's what I think, but I don't know. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. Such great answers. And we have more questions here that I'm going to just pop up. But was there anything that you want to add before I get into the Q&A? I mean, any pieces of advice, Arsalan? Any last little pieces, words?
Kind of just, in line with the theme of this conversation: absorb, read, watch, be eclectic, watch everything, watch international cinema. Let that be your passport. Please.
That's a good way.
Understand cultures outside of our country. It will supplement your creativity.
Mark Bose asks, now he isn't directing this to either, so maybe we'll let both of you to answer this. Carolina, we can start with you. How did you become a producer?
By accident. Just kind of realized, again, just to talk about the podcast again for a minute, like, people who tend to gravitate towards producing tend to have a similar personality type, which is they just thrive in chaos. I have learned after almost 50 interviews, and there's this thing of like, there's always a new challenge, and we're going to figure it out, whether that challenge is story and, something you can solve from a computer, or being on set and a macro problem that you have to solve. So it's for people who really love the challenge, always being challenged with something new and finding multiple angles to come up with a solution. But I came into it, I moved out to LA to pursue acting originally. And this is in 2006, when it was like a weird time where people could say things like, you're ethnically ambiguous, you're not Latina enough, not white enough. And so I was also right a few years after that, it was the writer's strike, and then the economy. It was just not a great time to be, having big dreams, I suppose. But I almost moved back home, and my mom was like, well, if you've tried everything, then yeah. And then I was like, I guess I haven't tried producing my own work. And this was right like at the birth of YouTube, and everybody who had a YouTube channel was either doing makeup or sketch comedy. And I was like, I'm neither of those things. And so, call it sheer ignorance, and that I just didn't know it was impossible. But I was like, I'm going to produce a play. I'm going to get money to do this show. I'm going to cast myself in the lead, and I'm going to use this as a showcase for myself. And that's what I did. I was working like 3 part-time jobs. I was the lead of this play. I was producing it. I didn't know what the hell I was doing. It was my first time, but I knew that I could figure it out, and I think once I clicked into that, I was like, oh, this is what a producer does. Like, I've been doing this my whole life, which is figuring things out, finding solutions, being like, here's the problem, here's what I want, how do I get it? That's essentially, to dumb it down, that's kind of what producing really is, and that really was the beginning. And that was actually May of 2010 when that play went live at the theater that now belongs to UCB on Sunset. And so you could say I've been doing this for a decade now, but really it took 5 years from 2010 to Autism in Love, which was 2015 when that came out, of learning and cutting my teeth, making shorts for no money, and like grinding it out and working all kinds of weird jobs just to understand it, and really being a student of how does this actually work? Because I have my way of doing things, but there's a structured way of doing things. And so that's what I've spent the past, decade learning. And now I'm still here. And I think because I am an artist at heart, I came into this business an artist first. I will always be an artist first. And so I have a certain soft spot and sort of different way of working with creatives, with writers and actors and anybody in between, because I understand the creative side so much, but I also know how execution works. And like, to your point, the art and the business, like, I think having gone the physical production side of the business, I've gotten to see that very really on the ground. And now I can sort of speak to that. So.
Great.
Yeah.
Arsalan, question for you. Marilyn asks, how did you get the funding for this project?
It's project by project. Every project has its own, kind of financial modulations and like its own approach to financing. Luckily we are pending the project. If it's, under $6.5 million, you're not subject to minimum guarantees necessarily, and what an actor is worth and what market, and some of the old kind of conceptual BS that the international film finance ecosystem has been built on, that is surgically racist. So luckily, on this project, because of the price point, because of what we're doing it for, we've been able to approach, financiers that are very much in line creatively with the type of story we want to tell. And that's very important. When you're taking a project out to finance, it's not only at what point do you take it out to show it to financiers, but who are you going out to? That's a very significant part of the process. That's a significant part of, breaking down the right creative partner, because if they're going to be putting millions of dollars into the project, you better bet they're going to have a creative voice at the table. So you really want to be mindful, and you want to have probably the most lethal weapon of all, the word no. Because if someone isn't really giving you some entity isn't giving you the right terms, or if, creatively there's just different philosophies and approaches to the project, it's fine. It's just business, it's not personal. And you move on to the next. So basically what I would say is, work from a writer's perspective, work with producers who have real sustained relationships with companies and financiers and financing studios, and vet that. Take the time to vet. Be patient. Take the time to vet, and really make sure that you're partnering with someone that can back up what they're saying, and that's really important because, relationships are, again, another pillar of this business. So when you partner with a producer who not only is incredibly passionate about your project creatively and is bringing a spirit of collaboration and creative equity, but they also have the right relationships, the fostered relationships to bring this project to fruition, so that's the answer.
Don't just see the green and take it.
You do just be ready for the consequences of that. I think every choice is totally fine. It's just what kind of journey do you want to have with that project? If you're just taking someone's money that you don't really know, there's just a lot of questions that come with that. And I think when you hear about people in the independent space having these terrible experiences, it's usually like, you didn't, like, to Arsalan's point, you didn't vet each other well enough. You just saw the money, or someone say, yeah, I'll give you like $100,000 to make this, but I want half of I want to control the IP with you, or, and you just are so desperate to get your thing made, you say yes. And I think it's a two-way street. It's not just writers being desperate for producers. It's like, no, you should make sure you're taking the time to find the person that you want on your team. You are the writer, you are empowered, because you have the creative, you have the idea at the end of the day. And so take the time to find the right person, not just anybody who calls themselves a producer, and interview people and be out there, like, talking to people all the time, and you get better and better at that skill and more empowered as a collaborator, honestly, if you can fine tune what it is you're looking for in a partner. And it's not everybody is made for everybody. It's really no different than dating. You have to have a really good, if you don't get a good vibe from someone, I trust that. Like, there's something there. Trust that. And vice versa. If someone doesn't get a good vibe from you, then good riddance. They're not your people. There's a lot of people out there. The scarcity mentality, I think, is very destructive. So I would hope people don't fall prey to that. I know it's challenging times, and it can feel like, oh my God, I just gotta, but that frenetic energy will only attract that back. And is that what you're looking for? I don't know.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Good question. A great educational question. Matteo is asking, and I'll let either of you answer this, but who's the quote unquote physical producer? What does that mean? And how many producers are there?
I mean, there's can be millions of producers, but the physical producer usually is if it's a union show, which is DGA. When I say union, I mean DGA. The UPM, which stands for Unit Production Manager, falls under the umbrella of the DGA, which, interestingly enough, is an extension of the director. And so she works to run the set. So she is the person who is responsible for every department head, usually is responsible for helping crew up and is the person you normally see running around between monitor and the PO and making, oh, the generator's out and we got to go, like doing all the day-to-day on the ground problem solving. Whereas sometimes the other producers who are at monitor tend to be more creative producers who were, you know, in this scenario, Arsalan would be at the monitor and I would be the person running around being like, hey, you know, we lost tomorrow's location, like let's power doing lunch and talk about what you want to do, you know, and it just depends. The thing, it's like every project is unique because it depends on how many people, how many producers there are, what those producers' contributions were to the project. Sometimes people get a producer credit because they brought a piece of talent and financing, which is wonderful and needed, but they're not the daily on the ground producer. And the Producers Guild started this thing a while back called the Producer's Mark, which is the thing that denotes who was the physical day-to-day producer that interfaced with everybody on the crew. So if you show a call sheet to the DP or to the gaffer of that project and you go, hey, do you know this producer? And they go, I've never heard of that person. That's not that producer because they were literally never on set. They'll be like, oh, this person here, yeah, that was my point of contact every day. That's the person I saw. That's the person I talked to. That's your physical producer typically. And line producer tends to refer to the lines in a budget. So they tend to look more at the accounting financials. They're usually responsible to the financier. In the indie space, you get hybrids. You get a UPM LP combo, which is what I do. You know, you kind of just have to do both. You have to know how to make and oversee a budget along with your accounting department. And then you also have to be the person being like, okay, we have $10,000 for this department. I'm going to tell the department head we have $10,000. And then you're the intermediate between all of those things. So I hope that answered your question. Please listen to the podcast.
I was just going to ask you, so Carly, what is the name of the podcast?
So the podcast is called Life with Kaka, and it is a play on my nickname, but it speaks to the messy parts of our journey. And I'm here to demystify this idea that especially what producers do is glamorous and easy, and we just sit around and like with our Starbucks lattes at monitor and roll up in Teslas and make all the money. That the realities of what it takes to do the work that we do. And I think as creatives, the more you can understand what that is and what the different producers do, the more you're empowered, especially when you are on a set, to know, oh, this question is not for that producer. It would actually be for this producer because they're the line producer. But it just shines a light on the realities. And it's these conversations we talk about a lot. And there's, you know, the perspectives of television producers, podcast producers to film producers, big studio film producers to indie film producers, and everybody in between. And so whatever sect of the industry you're most interested in, I'd say check it out because I have conversations with all kinds of people. Some get very spiritual and for honestly feel just like therapy, free therapy. And some are very granular to like, what does this mean? And what does this person do? And how do you get to do this and that and the other? But every conversation, I think, hopefully shines a light that we don't often get to shine on these conversations that I know happen between producers all the time, but I don't know if writers and directors and actors are necessarily a part of those conversations. And I'd like for them to be. And so that's why I do the show. It's a labor of love, and it's an act of service to everybody who wants to learn and listen, and hopefully they get some value from it. So
great. Cool. Yeah. Here's a question I'll let either of you answer here. Crystal is asking, can you talk a little bit about the shift in the industry in terms of diversity, embracing diverse writers versus embracing diverse storytelling without being put in a box?
The only color that surpasses skin color is green, and that's money. And typically it takes a lot of time for institutional racism to realize that, you know, they're going to miss out on money if they don't actually wake up, in a sense. So that's where it's checking boxes. And that's the majority of the, you know, institutional legacy side of the business, which is, you know, I'm talking about the major motion picture studios that are, you know, just parts of global conglomerates, right? Like they need to do that stuff. You know, I think one of the most, again, futile parts of this business are these diversity programs that studios start to look good for their shareholders and to look good for the street and to look good every 3 months for analysts. And it's meaningless. Hire them. Why do you need to put them in a program? Did you put white people in a program? Hire them. Let them fail. Grow them. Listen to them. You know, That, in my sincere opinion, is how you grow equity. So I think in general, at least in the spirit of gratitude, I'm excited that in the past, 3 to 4 calendar years, there has been, close to material changes, but there's still a lot of work to do. Carlina and I speak about this extensively. Our business is incredibly culpable. We are culpable. The legacy leaders of this industry of the past, at least century, are culpable in the cultural philosophy that a certain country, a certain ethnicity, a certain skin color is supreme, So this includes cultural icons, not just politicals. And I look forward to, the change. And it's got to be folks like where Donna Langley is sitting, and she runs she's the chairman of the Universal Film Group. That's where you can see change. That's where you can start seeing it, and that's one example. There's so many, like, what Charles King is doing at Macro. That's a material example where that is money being put into the ecosystem of diversification. It's not just, let me start a diversity program and just put these folks into a writing program and see if they're worth actually hiring for a movie. Here's $5 million. Go make your film. That's change.
Yeah.
Simple as that. It's not a calculus equation. It's not taking us to Jupiter or Mars. It's just basic understanding of the world, and that it's all made up. It's all made up. Ranks, made up. Skin color, supremacy, made up. So again, not to get too deep into it, I like where we're heading. We have a lot of work to do. C-suites need to be filled with diversity, more ethnic people, just how it needs to be. This is not just us. We're not just the only culpable institution. There are many, many others, So we have a responsibility as storytellers. So the writers and the filmmakers in this group that are listening to this conversation and that are bubbling the next great script, just keep in mind that you have a cultural and societal responsibility to educate. Again, not answer questions, but to raise them. That's the responsibility that we have. And we all got to take it, all of us. So That's my answer.
Carolina, you want to add to that?
I mean, I think Arsalan said it pretty well. The greatest export we have are our stories. And at the end of the day, it is all a story. But if we are not seeing the world reflected to us the way it actually is represented, then we're telling a lie. And I think for a long time, we all have been asleep to that. And now there's this awakening of we need to tell stories that are representative of the way our world looks, and not just the same stories about certain types of people or certain parts of the world. Being Brazilian, it's we don't need any more movies about the favelas. We know that issue. Awesome. Tell me something new. Tell me something exciting. Show me a different lens, a different angle. You talk about great ideas, and that's what I think it is. It's every idea we know has been told. Every story has been told. There's nothing new. Nobody's going to reinvent the wheel. The only thing you have is your perspective and the lens that you're going to bring into it. So what is that lens? What is it about that perspective that makes it unique and makes you go, I really want to know about this? Parasite. I mean, it's a perfect example of showing us a different world than most people would think of or may have seen before when they think of Korea, So I don't know. I think it's, I think it's such a big question, but for all of the turmoil we are experiencing, I'm a big believer that we are also living in one of the most exciting times to be alive as an artist of color, as women. And we have a responsibility to continue to tell stories that are going to be representative of our world. And what a time to be alive, right? We have this gift. What are you going to do with it? What are you going to do with it? And that's why, to kind of circle back to the beginning of the conversation, this is hard. It's a hard business. Writing is hard. You know, being a creative is hard. You've chosen this life. Why? What is it that you want to say with your one precious life? What is it that you want to do? What questions do you want to raise? What do you want to leave behind for others to find and go, whoa, this person was alive and lived through the 2020 craziness? Like, think about that. Infuse that into your stories. And it doesn't have to be this deep metaphorical thing. It can be through silly comedy. Like I said, I don't mean that it's got to be this deep thing for everybody. But just if you find something that is organically your point of view and you keep working on your craft, that will find its way to the top. It'll find its way to the people that, again, the energetic thing that will vibrate at that frequency and see the potential and help you get it to the finish line.
Yeah, I mean, it's not so much that stories can change the world, they do. I mean, there's proof that they do. And
they absolutely do.
You know, it's kind of incontrovertible. So I think that's a great way to end this. We have some other questions here, but I do highly suggest just say the name of your podcast again, Carolina.
Yeah, so it's Life with Kaka, and you can go to lifewithkaka.com, and I promote mostly on Instagram. You can find me. I'm pretty Googleable. Follow my personal page, Carlina Groppa, or account, and then the podcast. And it's on everywhere where you can find a podcast. There's also a YouTube channel where, now that I've been doing interviews remotely on Zoom, if you are the kind of person who likes to watch your conversations, I have the video component of some of those conversations there as well.
Cool. That's great.
Yeah.
All right. Arsalan, are you on social media?
I am. I'm on Instagram under my first name dot my last name, Arsalan.Asli.
It's easy enough. Well, thank you so much to both of you. This was a really great conversation. We'd love to have you on again.
Thank you.
Sometime in the near future when you're not so busy. And, all the best to the project you're working on. And with so much mystery behind it, Arsalan, now it's like I have to watch whatever it is that you're – whatever it is, it's going to be excellent.
And we appreciate you guys for having us. It was lovely. I hope everyone was able to, digest some of this stuff. But luckily there's a link so we could go back, But thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't know if you had a chance to look through any of the comments happening, but everybody on here really enjoyed everything you were both saying, and the discussion was really informative. And so thank you for your time. And
of course. Thank you for tuning in.
Yeah. And we look forward to keeping in touch and seeing the movie.
Yes. Maybe a year from now, we'll do a round 2 follow-up. Hopefully by that point we will.
Good idea. Good idea.
That's a really good idea. I will totally be on for that. Yeah.
Well, great.
Everyone stay safe, wear a mask, be smart. Much love.